we were out in Arizona and at ASU. I was co-directing the ASU Georgetown Academy for Innovative Higher Education Leaders. And Cameron was a fellow in that cohort. He was at Lehigh at the time doing a lot of things, including strategy. And Michael was one of our guest speakers who flew in and engaged, and I'm sure moved on to another flight. But we were there together, and it was great. And it's one of the joys of academic life that 6 years later, we can all find ourselves here, two of us at different places. So Michael, you're holding steady, which is great. And there's a little history here as well, which I didn't realize. Many of you, of course, will know that Michael is the president of Paul Quinn College. You may not know that it was founded in 1872 by freed slaves, and that Cameron is the provost at Shenandoah University in Virginia, which was founded in 1875, I believe, as a seminary. Is that correct, Cameron?
Conservatory. It's a conservatory.
Thank you. So 6 years ago, three of us were in the same room in Arizona, and these two schools, 150 odd years ago, were founded 3 years apart. And they were founded as part of a wave of innovation that was happening in the United States in the 19th century. And so here we are 150 years later, and we are all, of course, riding the turbulent seas of higher education. And we have two institutions, Paul Quinn and Shenandoah, that are facing new challenges and coming up with new ways to manage those seas. And we're going to talk about that today. The core of our focus is the ways in which designing new programs, new academic programs can drive recruitment and retention. But we're going to start a little bit broader than that, because our real conversation here is not so much on what are you doing, but how are you doing it? It's on how are you trying to bring about change that matches the needs of your community, where it's been and where you think it needs to go. So it's on the how as much as the what. So without further ado, Michael and Cameron, welcome. Michael, let me start with you. Your story, Paul Quinn's story, you've made quite well known. I'm still waiting for my visit to see the basketball court floor that you have pioneered there. But let me ask you to step back and give us a little broader framing. When you look at Paul Quinn now, what are the threats you see and the opportunities, and what constraints are you operating under?
Sure, no, and let me say this, I really appreciate the invitation to be here, and always am excited to engage on an intellectual level with the things that Minerva comes up with. You know, I think the threat to any small college is the same, right? And that is, you don't have at some point, you don't have enough students, right? Because your ability to be supported in a tuition dependent institution is based on who comes in the door. We are a school that had incredibly noble aspirations upon its founding to educate freed slaves and their progeny, and to do it in a way that we saw fit. And they took people who were never thought to be folks who were automatically believed to be college worthy. So many of our students are coming from backgrounds where people counted them out. And so for a good many years of the college's existence, they took these people and gave them a pathway to a wonderful life. But that pathway was not necessarily to a lucrative life. Many of our alums wound up being teachers, pastors, government workers, stalwarts of their communities, really amazing people, but they weren't wealthy. And so consequently, our donor base is one which we have to cultivate in a very different manner. We don't have 100 alums who are millionaires that we can call to say, hey, we need to do A, B, C, and D. So we have to sell differently. And then at the same time, we are people that are trying to teach under-resourced communities to get off your knees, stop begging, and find the genius of your own environments. Learn to do for yourselves. And that is extraordinarily difficult. So in an era where people want to discredit the very history that these types of institutions were founded on, it's a material threat, the conservative nature of this country right now, right? The desire to pretend that, you know, things aren't what they are. And that is difficult. So as you look at it, it's a combination of a history which did not produce a plethora of supremely wealthy individuals that can fund the schools themselves. We're not a Research One institution. So we believe in fighting the fights that the communities we serve need. So we can't count on tens of millions of dollars of federal funds. And then we live in a state and in a country that has taken a hard turn in a direction which would discredit our very history and existence. So, you know, and we're not people who are going to pretend that that isn't the case. So those are really very unique challenges. But the beauty of who we are is we see incredible opportunities even in that mist, and have fought and climbed forward. And because of our innovative nature, because of our ability to design programs that speak to the needs of these communities, it's giving us an opportunity to really do extraordinary things.
Well, Michael, thank you. I mean, you have framed this in the deepest existential terms, both historically, the nature of the broader country and the state that you're in, and then very practically, the number of students that you need to have coming in the door. So it's an existential at all those levels. It's turtles all the way down, as they say. And I want to come back in a few minutes to thinking about your broad strategies and then some specific ones that we've worked on together. But Cameron, let me come over to you. You've been in Shenandoah just under a year. Again, 3 years younger than Paul Quinn, but a long history. Give us a sense of the context in which you're operating. Where are there existential threats, and are there opportunities that you're seeing even within that?
Well, yes, but let me first start with just thank you again for the opportunity to be here. What a blessing it is to be here with both you and Michael Sorrell. I don't remember if you recall this, but I said to you after Michael was done talking about 6 years ago that I was ready to run through a wall, if that's where he was going. So those of you who are here, Michael is one of the most inspirational people I've seen in higher education, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And I take that inspiration myself. I mean, one of the other things that Michael and I have in common is that we didn't necessarily grow up entirely in higher education. And now we're both at institutions that themselves have a history of innovation and a desire to serve a population of learners that otherwise might not be served, right? And I mean, Shenandoah itself did start in 1875 as a music conservatory. So we too have a population of graduates who are primarily music educators, at least of age to make major donations. And as a result, have had to be an innovative institution ourselves, up to and including moving the entire institution to Winchester around the 1960s, just to persist from Dayton. So that sort of innovative spirit is in our institution, and it's one of the reasons I was attracted to come here. And add to that a creative and innovative faculty led by a creative and innovative president. And I think we are ripe with opportunity, but still facing some of the same downward pressures that the rest of higher ed is facing. And some of those are driven by the fact we've sort of lost the narrative in the public square collectively. Some of that is this dog whistle of the demographic cliff that's out there. And some of that is this sort of criticism of the value of higher ed. And I have a huge passion for higher ed and believe fundamentally in its value in lifting social and economic opportunities for young people and those people who have not yet decided to get a bachelor's degree. And quite frankly, our nation needs for us to have more bachelor's degrees conferred. And so when I think about what all of that means at Shenandoah and why, what threats and opportunities are out there and why we might want to challenge ourselves, I think about our superpower, which is launching new programs, and the ability in that superpower to sort of harness that and then partner it with ideas of formative development. Can we produce with a brand stamp or brand promise, people who are fully formed humans that can demonstrate the human skills that the world is demanding and industry is demanding, and can we harness our strengths in active learning to continue to perpetuate ourselves? And I think the answer is yes. We are not as vulnerable as many institutions are, but we're not going to save ourselves with philanthropy either. And so, we have to make some fundamental shifts ourselves. And I think one of those, to maybe be a little bit more pointed, Noah, is like many institutions in the private space, we are a particularly learner-concerned institution. We care deeply about every person who walks into our classrooms and onto our campus. And that isn't quite the same as being learner-centric. And so that is the really fundamental shift that we've got to make in understanding what that means as an institution. And so, as we continue to grow, the question is, how might we harness these strengths that we have and position ourselves to persist in a world that is constantly putting downward pressure on higher education.
Well, I saw Michael blink, I think at the same time I did, when you made this distinction between learning concerned and learning centric. And I think we want to pull that open a little bit. Let me, Michael, let me add to the, I think both of you have spoken here now, not only about the sort of larger demographic and financial and historical issues, but there's a personal human dimension I've heard both of you pull out here, right? A sense of uplift and obligation and responsibility in human development. So I love hearing the human part to this as well as the institutional part. Michael, if I can segue this back to you though, thinking about when you took over at Paul Quinn and as you've brought it forward, there are a lot of different ways people talk about doing innovation today, right? You can be a disruptive innovator. You can be a radical incrementalist. You can work from the inside out or the outside in. Can you tell us a little bit about your strategies in general? And then we'll follow up with this as we get into some of the particular programs both of you are working on.
Sure. So at my core, I'm an activist, right? Like that is who I am. It was who I was built to be by my family. I'm a lawyer by training, and I wasn't attracted to the law because I wanted to be a partner in a big law firm or anything like that. I was attracted to the law because I idolized Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, and not the version of Thurgood that was a Supreme Court justice, but the version of Thurgood that tried a line of cases that remade America. And he took the law and bent it to address the needs of a society. It was almost as if he was obsessed with the common good. And I use the term in common good, I'm Jesuit educated. So the Jesuits teach you to be men and women for others. And if you are truly living up to that creed, then you are an activist, right? Like you are focused on the idea that things can be better for all of us. And it may require sacrifices for some of us, but everyone's going to make sacrifices at some point in their lives. And so the way I approach education, the way I approach educational leadership is from a very pragmatic stance. And it's how do you meet people where they are, right? Just how do you meet people where they are? Well, I mean, I went to Oberlin for undergrad, Duke for graduate school and law school, and Penn for my doctorate. The system worked for me, but the system worked for me because I came from an upper middle class, affluent family background. My parents ran a restaurant that made a lot of money. I went to the very best private schools. I am who I have been trained to become from the standpoint of how I approach things intellectually. Now, but what you have to understand, one is I got to Paul Quinn, and it's an institution where there were no people like me. And that's not a slight on anyone. It's just, that's not the demographic that was here. The demographic that was here was actually the demographic of my parents. My father never went to college. He grew up in a single parent home in New Orleans. My mother went to college. Her mother went to college. They both went to graduate school. But she grew up in a family where my father played in the Negro, my grandfather played in the Negro Leagues. They were in the rural South. They were poor. When my mother went to college, she went with her first cousin, and the families didn't have enough money to send them with tuition, books, fees, and clothes. So they paid the tuition, bought the books, and bought one set of clothes for the girls to share. Might have been okay, except my mother was 5'11" and my aunt was 5'5", 5'6", right? So I'll just let you work your mind for the visual of how they must have looked on alternating days, right? And so for me, what I quickly came to realize was that the world wasn't made up of people with my socioeconomic background. This country's educational system is now defined by poverty. There are more American students in public K through 12 education that are coming from low income and under-resourced communities than anywhere else. The majority of our students are coming from those backgrounds. So we can continue to construct institutions that, we can be like the 40 or 50 schools that tell everyone that they're top 20 and all mine the same type of student, or we can actually speak to the people who exist. We can decide that, like, why don't we do something radical and say that we're going to end first generation college students, right? We're going to make sure everyone goes to college, right? Because how many more decades are we going to have first generation college students and this surplus of colleges and universities? Right? Like I am fascinated by this idea that there aren't enough people coming to college anymore. And yet and still, we still have an abundance of people who are first generation college students. So our true radicalness, and I love how, Cameron, how you use superpower, because that's how I actually speak to my kids. I'm always like, what's your superpower, right? But if we have a superpower at Paul Quinn, it is radical pragmatism. Right? It's this idea that why don't we just do the simple things that produce the incredible results for the most amount of people? We're not Stanford innovation. We are every man and every woman innovation. And it turns out there are way more every people than there are anyone else.
And Michael, what is I love how you make this distinction in terms of innovation in the top 20 and then innovation for everyone. So tell us a little bit about, given the existential threats you face, you need to recruit students and you need to retain them. And we could talk about everything else. And if that doesn't happen, Paul Quinn doesn't go on. So a lot of people would think about, there's a lot of things you might be doing. Maybe it's a new advertising campaign, and all those things are important. But in working with the Minerva project, you identified a program that you thought would make a difference, that would do something distinctive. And we sometimes forget about that in higher education. The core of what we do might actually drive it. Tell us a little bit about that idea.
Well, here's the irony of our relationship with Minerva. We have so many projects that we're working on with you guys that it's really pretty interesting. So, we can do a couple of different ones, right? Like we can talk about our dedication to shortening the amount of time people spend in college, right? And getting them in and out in 3 years, getting them focused on the outcome. We are, as an institution, our institutional mission is to eradicate intergenerational poverty. And well, let me put it like that's our institutional vision, right? Our mission is to create agents of change in the global marketplace. But we, in looking at this, I'm always entertained by colleges and universities and higher education leaders who say, education is the way to end poverty. No, it's not. The way to end poverty is giving people more money, right? Like it's money, right? Like if you have enough money, you can eradicate poverty, which means that you have to do things focused on that. So let's get people in and out of school faster, right? While they're in school, let's give them access to internships and jobs, which expedite their competitiveness in the marketplace, right? Like it's not rocket science. Shorter time spent generating debt, more time spent preparing for generating wealth. So our Minerva relationship on one end does this. It allows us to do that. We also have a partnership where we are building an honors college with Minerva's assistance. So it's really one of the cool things about Minerva is it's just an incredibly innovative place. I mean, you guys think of things differently. You're willing to try things. I mean, your entire premise, let's build an Ivy League caliber college from scratch, right? Like that's really what it was, right? It's like, let's build this from scratch. And that's pretty crazy when you think about it, until you realize it's completely doable. You're doing it. It's completely reasonable. And you know what? It's completely necessary. So I know I went way beyond the conversation of like one specific program.
No,
But I'm just always fascinated by the work that you guys do and the approach that you take. I just think it's fantastic.
We of course appreciate that, but I'm thinking of everybody on the call here as well. Reasonable and doable. That's a Venn diagram that doesn't often happen. And so we're going to come back in a little bit and talk about the experience with some of these projects as we get further under the hood. Cameron, coming over to you, can you connect for us a little bit about how you've gone through the academy program, you've gone through the ACE program, you came into Shenandoah thinking about change and innovation. Tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do there and the particular project that we've been working on together, because then we'll both, as I say, get under the hood with each of you to see how that's been going and the roadblocks and how you've been dealing with them.
Yeah, thanks. And I was really blessed to spend some time with very creative leaders, both at the Academy for Innovative Higher Education Leaders and also in the ACE program, which really opened my eyes to some of the prevailing challenges in higher ed and the speed with which we need to address some of these endeavors, and maybe even more importantly, as Michael pointed out, the 20 institutions that have always been the top 20 institutions that tell everybody how it's supposed to work. this sort of fascination we have with isomorphism in higher ed and in the pursuit of rankings is a real significant challenge. And so coming into Shenandoah, I came in with an appreciation that this wasn't a place that was necessarily trying to chase the prestige, but really, and maybe most importantly, was building people who want to serve others. And I have a very distinctive memory from when I interviewed at Shenandoah, and I came on campus, and I spent time with 8 different students throughout the day. And I asked every one of them the same question. And that was, what is it that you want to do with your Shenandoah degree? And all of them, bat in 1,000, all of them said, I want to serve other people. So I knew right then that there was something that we needed to do at Shenandoah, and when I got here, and that was, how might we defend the values of this institution in an environment that is dismissive of residential education, while at the same time finding ways to serve the aspirant learners out there, those who may never set foot on our campus, right? So it's both defending your existing institution and innovating and changing it and growing it in a modern way, and maybe moving from passive to active pedagogy, or figuring ways to do things in a quote unquote scrappy way, because we are not a wealthy institution that's going to throw lots of money at a new college, necessarily, like some of those more elite institutions can. And what's happening here? And at the same time, can we move our faculty? Can we help our faculty continue to develop and grow, and make some investments in them in a partnership? And so the thing I often struggle with in describing the partnership we have with Minerva is very similar to Michael's challenge, and that is that everybody needs to hear something different to do this, and that means it's a good partnership to me, right? If we're able to answer the questions that every faculty member has and catch them. So for me, some of it is, well, why Minerva? Well, this is an investment in faculty development. Yes, okay. Well, this is an investment in active pedagogy, or it's an investment in formative learning that we can longitudinally measure a human's development, regardless of modality. Yes, that's the thing I want, right? Oh, this gives us scale, it gives us an opportunity to do things differently. Or with our particular projects, there are a couple of really key factors at the more tactical operational level, but at the more meta university level, it's what I said at one time to my colleagues at Minerva was 2 things. First, I said was, I really didn't believe in you at first, because I heard Ben's story about building this Ivy League type institution, and it turned me off. And then I started talking with Ben, and I understood what he was talking about, right? It made sense, and we were speaking actually the same language, and proving that somebody who goes to Shenandoah travels a further distance in their learning journey than somebody who goes to Harvard. And it doesn't mean it's a worse experience at either place, but we should celebrate the growth that they have. And then the second thing was that, I felt like we needed an engine. We need this engine for growth and for adaptation and to build our future. And I think we get that, right? Because the project we're working on has really a multiplication factor. We aren't trying to put 20 students into one program. We're focused on 400 over the course of a year, right? And it's about pedagogical and cultural shift. It's about stamping our brand, but it also addresses some of our challenges with academic compression. And those compression forces are not only programmatic or degree wise, but they're also, we do have some persistence challenges. And so we're hyper focused with our program, our partnership with you guys on sort of creating that adaptiveness that allows us to meet learners who we're not serving as well in a much stronger, more intentional way, and to measure their growth in a longitudinal way over 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And then building on that, right? So we're already, like Michael talked about, we're already talking about 3 or 4 different projects, to build on this because it's making sense and it's working.
So, Minerva Project launched Minerva University 10 years ago. and spent 10 years building up the new kind of university you guys are talking about, developing the intellectual property, the active learning, the cross-curricular scaffolding, the formative feedback, the data, all of these things. And of course, for the last 2 years, the Minerva project is now, well, still supporting the university in a variety of ways, doing these kinds of partnerships, not trying to build one institution only from the ground up, but working with you all in ways in which we can create new ways that existing institutions can survive and thrive. And I think what I'd like to do for all of our participants here is really focus on the particular programs and what's gone well and where there have been challenges that we can all learn from, because it takes 10 years to build one university and it goes through a lot of changes, but we all know that even the perfect project that we agree on has to go, it's a human process that we're working through. Michael, we've worked on an urban scholars program with you. We are working on an honors college with you. You've made the case, it's, for why these can be compelling things. But tell us a little bit about your strategy for how to implement this. Have you run into roadblocks? How have you pivoted to work through introducing these things? And then Cameron, will come to you to talk about this general education program, because in some ways, Michael, you're working in a variety of ways that you indicated, and Cameron, you're starting with the guts, the gen ed dimension of it. Michael?
Sure. Well, we got to the place we are now because in many ways, we probably started reimagining the guts of learning. And for us, the answer to your question lies in the reality that you can't be at Paul Quinn and not embrace innovation, right? If you are an individual who wants to say, no, maybe we shouldn't, then really and truthfully, you shouldn't work here, right? Like, it's not going to work out well for you, because what I tell people on day one of every new year, and oftentimes throughout the year, is that there are no more permanent solutions. All we've done is rented an answer for a short-term period. So while we are implementing, we have to understand that the clock is already ticking on this idea. So stay in problem-solving mode. Stay looking for opportunities to improve everything that we're doing. When you develop that mindset, the idea that there are roadblocks to introducing new programming really doesn't exist, right? Because you start with, how do we do it, right? Well, I take that back. You start with, will this be good for our students? Because that's really the only real question. Then once you determine that it will be good for the students, then your question has to become, how do we implement it? And for us, answering the question, is it good for our students, doesn't really allow room for people just to be needlessly difficult, right? To just say, but we've always done it this way, or I'm afraid to change. And, and I always point out to people, you have to change. I mean, in the 15 years I've been a college president, the students have changed dramatically. In the first 10 years, the pace of change was a little slower. In the last 5 years, it is extraordinary how much they have changed and how quickly that's occurring. And so when we introduced the Urban Scholars Program, that was a nod to the fact that the students are changing at light speed. And what they really want to do is be taught how to make a difference. Because if you listen to your students, I mean, one of the fundamental questions we ask everyone, people who are interviewing here, students who attend here, is tell me the dream you have for your life. And there has never been a single person in 15 years of asking that question that has said, I want to be average. I want to go slow. No one said that. What people have always said is, I want to make a difference. They articulate things that are indicative of people who want to leave a mark on society. The Urban Scholars Program says we're going to give you a year of training, and then we're going to teach you by introducing you to people who make a difference every day in the communities you come from, and so that you can have access to them and you can learn from them, and you have a job doing these things while you're finishing up your education. And so, you know, I'm sure there are people that probably had thoughts about pushing back, who had thoughts about roadblocks. To be honest with you, I don't know if I would be able to recognize a roadblock if you set it up right in front of me, right? I don't perceive things that way. I don't think that way. I am obsessed with the idea of what is the best thing for my student and my students, and that's that. So that's, I mean, you know, maybe we should go find people that I've run over in the process of innovating that they might be able to tell you about it.
We'll see if yeah, that's right. I'm thinking this is more like hurdles, and as long as you're clearing the hurdle, you're doing all right. But when you knock them down, they don't feel so good. Well, Cameron, you know, Michael's been there 15 years. You come in, you're there less than a year. General education is usually where provosts go to die. I mean, it's the core of what we should be doing, right? And yet everyone on this call can show you their battle wounds for the different reasons why people can't agree on doing that. When I was at Duke and we were building this university in China, we built it faster than the home university could take 3 years to actually decide that, no, they were just going to keep things the same in the curriculum. So why did you go after Gen Ed, and what's that been like?
It's a great question. You know, the 15 years is interesting, because when I got here, I said to our faculty that I think we have 15 months to be change able, and to kind of get to the innovation that Michael's pointing to. And some of them heard me say changed, not rather than change able, right? So you can imagine the wounds I've gotten from that. Like, where's your plan? Why haven't you changed us yet? But when I remind them it's about being change able, that is an endeavor to recognize that we both need to be timeless in higher education and timely. And so when I looked at the spectrum of opportunity for us and how we might go collaborate, it actually, the Gen Ed, or what we call, our Gen Ed is called Shen Ed, you know, that was really obvious to me. That was sort of a no-brainer that we would go after that. And here's the reasons why. First, it's the place where we can definitively say that we're centering learners. It's the place where we can definitively say that if we're going to center trust in the work that we do with the outside world, that's where we can absolutely measure the human skill growth of our learners. And it's the place where we can definitely center equity. All the other programs, you know, that are spread across the institution, I can't put my fingers into them in the same way. The second reason is that I have a very, very talented leader in the name of Amy Sarch, who had 3 years ago, already led a reformation of our general education. So that was still fresh, right? And she could pick that back up and run with this. But maybe more importantly, when you look at the institution and where we needed to make some investments and sort of put our money where our mouth is, you know, where we lose our learners along the way are in some of those core courses. And so being able to focus in with sort of laser surgical focus on the courses and skill sets where we lose our learners, that's where we wanted to make the investment. So take that 2 more steps, and I look at the spectrum of our undergraduate schools. I mean, even our 2 graduate schools, and there's one of them that is doing 85% of the general education work, which means that they can't do the other work that they should be doing as a school, and that's our arts and sciences group. And so that, for me, when I looked at that, this partnership, this effort gave us the opportunity to ask representatives from across the institution. So we have representatives from all of the 4 undergraduate schools, and ask them to participate in reshaping this, so that we could get to a place where they were actively delivering on those courses, and we could ask our arts and sciences folks to be able to do some other arts and sciences stuff. So all of those reasons, really, at the end of the day, and add into this the way we needed to pay for our work together, it was sort of a no-brainer to go after the general education.
And in doing that, Cameron, have you found, are there things that have I mean, I started by saying, why'd you pick this battle? Yeah. And now let me flip it. One of the things we found at Minerva Project is working with partners is that, particularly if you get a group of faculty engaged who can sometimes be a little, they can be, look, we're faculty. Our job is to ask questions, to be dubious. We were grown to be skeptical, right? We were not often grown, Michael, to be social activists. We were grown to be questioners, which is great, up until a point that it questions a project to death. And the thing I found most exciting is when we engage with partners and the faculty fellows themselves become the champions. But it's a little bit science and a little bit art, how that happens. Have there been things that you found your faculty have that's resonated and they are leading that charge? You referred to one faculty member who had led a gen ed reform that you're building on. What's it like now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I should responsibly and authentically say that faculty aren't always the hindrance to any innovation in the institution, and we sort of they get blamed for a lot of it. But there are other systemic issues that cause us to not want to change. I mean, you could point to accreditation, you could point to where we source our administrators, you could point to a lack of understanding of how higher education works, and you could certainly point to a lack of foresight amongst many people. I mean, the immediate defensiveness or stonewalling or criticism or contempt, and it isn't always our faculty. I find our faculty are incredibly creative and desirous of growth and change. I mean, they certainly have a growth mindset, and I found that at other institutions as well. But when I think about the work that we're doing with Minerva and our faculty who are working on those projects, as I said when I started, they all needed something different to get into the project, and all of them, I hope, are getting that. But I distinctly, we did a teaching demonstration the other day with one of our more senior faculty, and he did the teaching demo, and he reflected afterwards how much this approach that we are using has changed his lens on the way he teaches. And I find that to be really, really important because, when we went into the pandemic, we called it Shenflex, but it's a high flex model, right? Where you're teaching synchronously in person and online, and you're using Zoom in our case, and no problem with Zoom, but it isn't built on learning science. And so the premise of having a platform that is intentionally designed to deliver fully active online pedagogy, or in our case, to shift to a hybrid modality, was really, really important. And the second thing I really appreciate about the work that we've been doing together is that it really is a partnership, and this is the conversation I have a lot with our folks. Is that they'll get a little bit frustrated, and they say, "Well, they didn't think of this," and I'll say, "Well, okay, That's why we're partnering. So I'll give you an example: neurodivergent learners and enabled focus. That's how our world is designed, right? And so working with you and your folks at Minerva, we've been really able to challenge each other on how might we get to a place where we can serve neurodivergent learners or differently able learners, which is, an overlooked population in many cases. And how do we do that together and develop that capacity together, which I think is really intriguing, in that we're partnering to design and redesign continuously.
Yeah, I have to say this. I love the upbeat and positive dimensions of this. I'm going to put in the chat here just because you remind me of it. When I hear high flex, it makes me very nervous because I think it's the hardest thing to do. And James Janone and I at Minerva Project did a little piece recently on, the combination of faculty development, intentional curriculum, learning science, and hybrid, and some of the things we've been learning from this. Let me just, Michael, last question for you. You've been listening to this conversation. You talk to a lot of audiences. But the challenges are not just the human challenges, right? Which direction, purpose, motivation, support can go a long way toward. It's just you're trying to recruit students. Why do they want to join an honors college at Paul Quinn? How do you up level that kind of institutional setting? You're repositioning Paul Quinn's brand not only globally but in the minds of these very students. Any reflections on what you're learning right now? What's most on your mind about how to make these things work?
Sure. Before I do that, though, I want to go back to something Cameron said, because I 2000% agree with him. People give faculty a bad rap about being the problem in terms of innovation, right? I don't. At our school, the faculty is not the problem at all. They weren't they've been really great partners in this. I actually think we have a structural problem in terms of how institutions are governed. All right. We take individuals we put people on our boards. And again, this is not my board because I love my board. I love my job. I don't want to get fired, right? But in all seriousness, I have a wonderful board for an entrepreneurial mindset, right? They understand that our job is to continue to solve relevant problems. And so when you do that, you got to throw lots of stuff up against the wall. We're not going to hit with everything, but then you don't come back and beat people up because it's an iterative process. But many times people are put on boards not because of their alignment with the purpose and the pursuit of the institution, but because of some very narrow focus, some narrow goals. And so, I view governance as something that is shared with parents, something that is shared with students, something that is shared with faculty, something that is shared with the administration, something that is shared with the board, right? Everyone has a role to play. And I'm very, very critical because I don't think we've really owned this in higher education. And this is going to be the source of sort of my next version of scholarship. And that is, our country is in trouble. The single unifying characteristic of all these people who are involved in the struggle that it is to be America right now is they all went to American schools. Our educational system has produced people who are threatening the very core of our country. We no longer get along. We don't have common purposes. We have to take ownership of what we have wrought and now look for ways to fix it. But that's not answering your question. And I'm going back. I just wanted to say that I am in the I am in the congregation for the sermon that Cameron just preached about don't beat up the faculty, right? So now let's talk about the Honors College at PQC. So our Honors College is actually going to be focused on problem solving. And our whole idea, the whole curriculum is built, is challenge-based learning. People embrace solving the problems that are relevant to them. And I didn't think that was particularly revolutionary. I mean, think about it. If someone came to you, Noah, and said, tell me your number one problem, and we're going to build the course around teaching you how to solve your number one problem. Mm-hmm. Might that be more thrilling to you? Might that be more relevant to you? Might that be more captivating? Mm-hmm. I think so, right? And so, you know, we came across this model because in all my classes, I wait to finish the syllabus until I've had a week with the class mm-hmm. and an opportunity to say to them, what do you care about? What problem do you want to solve? Now, give me grace to go back and construct an academic experience for you that teaches you how to solve the issue that's most relevant to you. Yeah. And that's what our Honors College is built on. And so, look, there are going to be lots of people who say, I want to be taught the way that people have always been taught. And that's fine. We respect that. But we don't need to be 500,000 students to be successful, right? I tell my staff all the time, you just need to go find me at best 500 people a year from anywhere who want to approach problem solving and education the way we are approaching it. Yeah. That's it. That's all you have to go find, right? So one of my reflections is we spend so much time on the magnitude of the problem instead of the magnitude of the opportunity.
So right? I love that, Michael, because you use this phrase, you know, we talk a lot about build and launch, you know, you build the thing and then you launch it. And a lot of what I've seen in working with you all and in a lot of other projects is there's a degree of launch and build. I'm thinking about your semester, your syllabus. You launched it for a week, your class, and then you did a lot of the building. And it's this getting up this energy that both of you have generated at your institutions with your colleagues and your partners there, because the hardest thing to do often is getting that lift off in academia. It's not anybody's fault. It's right. Just the institutions. There's a lot of gravity pulling us down. And I love the syllabus example of launch and build.